November 19th, 1863, Abraham Lincoln, and I'm not going to do the whole Gettysburg Address for you, even though it would only take me, it took him 2 minutes and 30 seconds. It would take me about 1 minute and 25. Apparently I speak faster than President Lincoln did. But he rose on that occasion, and he did what was called, and come to be known as the Gettysburg Address, one of the greatest speeches of all times. He was not the keynote speaker that day at the dedication of the cemetery. As a matter of fact, the keynote speaker was a man by the name of Edward Everett, who spoke for an hour and a half. He was the main orator that day, and everybody came to hear Edward Everett speak, and they just asked the president if he would make a few remarks. Years later, John F. Kennedy, President Kennedy, went to Theodore Sorensen, who was his speechwriter, the guy who wrote that famous line, "Ask not what your country could do for you, but ask what you could do for your country." They went to Sorensen and said, "Sorensen, can you make the Gettysburg Address better?" Sorensen worked on it for hours and hours and hours. And he came back and he said, "The only way that you can make it better and make it clearer is to make it shorter. And I can't make it any shorter than it already is." On that occasion, President Lincoln hit the mark. Everett was there acting like everybody wanted to come and hear him, so he figured, I'll just talk for an hour and a half because they came to hear me. Lincoln remembered that he was there to honor the dead, to talk about the Republic, to talk about how we had been in this great Civil War, and that the people who spilled their blood, that we would never forget. Lincoln made it nothing about him. By the way, read the speech again, and he uses like 1- and 2-syllable words. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, never use a 3-syllable word where a 2-syllable word will do. I could sound really smart if I used words like vociferous and epitome and all of those things today, and you'll go, gosh, he's smart, but I haven't clarified or made anything clear. Do you know that with simplicity, you get simplicity when you have clarity? But we often will complicate the simple, don't we? We do it in life. Something's very, very simple, should not take us any time, and we spend all of this time complicating it when all we need to do is simply do it. And I thought a lot about this for this message, where I thought, why do we complicate the simple? Why do we do it? I think sometimes because it's what I will call sort of our own boasting, our own pride. You ever notice that if we want to complicate something, if we don't want to tell somebody else how to do it, and we want to be the only one, we make it look like it's so complicated so that nobody else is going to want to do it. They're going to go, oh, there's no way I can't do that. I'm not going to be able to do that. That's too much. And we make it look really, really complicated because it's ours. And we want people to think we're something. And so we make it look complicated. By the way, when somebody makes things look easy, that means they've got clarity and they understand what they're doing. There may have been a lot of work that went into it, but when they get up and they do it or they write it or do whatever else, it looks easy. Watch out. They have taken the time to complicate the simple. But when you see somebody taking something that's simple and complicate it, they may want to do it because of their own arrogance, because they want people to say, boy, look at that. They are really, really smart. When meanwhile, all they've done is complicated the simple. We do that because of our own boasting. But there's 2 other reasons why we do it that I think are probably even more important. The next one is because of our own belief systems. We complicate the simple because of our own belief systems. And by the way, we do that in the church more than anything else. We bring our belief systems of how we think church ought to be done. We have our belief systems of our culture. We have our belief systems of our denomination. We have our belief systems of how we always used to do it. And sometimes when there was all the pomp and the circumstance and the show, we would go, yay, we did church. You understand that the robes and the organs and the pipe organs and the mighty fortress, all of that today has given way on the other end, from the pipe organs and the robes and all of the other stuff to the fog machines and the laser light shows and all of the other stuff. And we've complicated it because we don't have the right belief system about it. Something else that causes us to complicate the simple. And it's our own busyness. We get so busy that we get distracted we make it more complicated. We're like, well, you start planning it. You ever over-plan something? I love when people are doing videos today. I take the video camera when I'm doing a video for you all, and I'm sorry, but I'll prop it up on my desk or I'll put it on the thing, and then I hit the button and then I do it. We don't have a whole video production team. I don't have somebody standing up there going, 3, 2, 1. Sometimes you'll see my finger come up against the thing like that, and I could take all the time to get all these people together. By the time I went to shoot a video like that for you all, church would be done. It's finished. But we get distracted with the preparation and the planning and the how, and then we read more books and we do more research and we take another seminar, and we do that, by the way, I talked about belief with our theology too. We would rather argue the theology than do the thing. And we have so complicated life, and more importantly, we have complicated the simplicity of who we are supposed to be as the church. So what do we do about it? Well, there's a story. There's 2 stories that we're going to look at very quickly, and we're going to take a different look at them this morning. Now, let me tell you, the Bible's made up of so many different stories. Stories connect. Stories bypass all of your rational mindset, and they go to the heart. Sometimes Jesus told stories that we call parables theologically, but they were kind of like fables. They were like remember Aesop's fables? They would be a fable to make a point. And so the parables always had a point. They may or may not have been a true story. Most times they were not, but they could have been a conglomeration of things. And then we have true events and true stories that actually happen that still teach us a lesson. I bet you, though, when you've read Luke 10, when we talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan, you're never going to see it tied to what we're going to do next. Now, so let me ask you to put anything you've heard about the Good Samaritan aside, and let's read the story and give you the background. On the occasion, verse 25 of Luke chapter 10, an expert in the law, belief, remember that? Remember we talked about how belief is important and the theology? And so the expert in the law stood up to do what? To test Jesus. He wanted to argue theology. He wanted to argue philosophy. He wanted to trip Jesus up. He wanted to show that Jesus wasn't as smart as everybody thought Jesus was. Teacher, Rabbi, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Doesn't that sound good? What a good question. Rabbi, you're the one. Tell me, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And I'm sure everybody that was around there went, oh, man, that's a good question. Wonder how Jesus is going to answer this. Oh. And then Jesus flips the script on him and says, well, okay, tell me what's written in the law. He replied, how do you read it? And the man answered this. I love it. Here it is. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbors yourself. So you get this guy goes, he says, okay, Jesus said, what's the law say? He said, okay, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and love your neighbors yourself. That's it. Good answer. So boy, now he looks smart. Everybody's probably going, ooh, and Jesus said, yeah, good, you've answered correctly. Got any more, Jesus? Then Jesus replied and said, do this and you will live. What? Wait a minute, that's it? Oh, hold on a second. I just asked you this deep philosophical question about how can I inherit eternal life? How can I spend eternity in heaven? How can I get to heaven? This is philosophical. This is deep. It's got to be bigger than this. And Jesus said to him, what does the law say? Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said, do this, and that's it. Well, now, it can't be that simple. Now, can it? And of course, this guy wanted to make it far more complicated because he was trying to trip up Jesus. But it says he wanted to justify himself, so he asked the question. Are you ready? And who is my neighbor? Now we read that. Dr. Luke records this, and we can push past it if we're not careful. Much has been made about this, that my neighbor, is it my neighboring country? Is it my neighboring town? Is it everybody that needs anything from me ever that I'm supposed to give up? Who is my neighbor? And in this case, he was asking from the standpoint of this Jewish expert of the law, because remember, there were Samaritans who were half Jews, that they were half-breeds, and they didn't like them already. And then there was the Gentiles who were referred to as Gentile dogs. We've talked about that in this series. And so he's wanting to say, now, wait a minute, should I help the Jews first? They're really my neighbor, right? Because they're God's chosen people. It can't be the half-breeds, and it can't certainly be the Gentile dogs. So, Jesus, I need you to tell me who my neighbor is. Now, Jesus could have said, hey, your neighbor is da-da-da-da-da. But he doesn't. And Jesus goes for the jugular in the story. And then he starts. Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Immediately they're listening. Jerusalem to Jericho, a journey that everybody takes. It'd be like, I'm going to go from here to West Palm Beach, or I'm going to go from here to Miami. When he was attacked by robbers. That happened very often. They had particular routes that they could take, and there were always robbers that were there, ready to mug them, ready to attack them, ready to take whatever they could take. And so this was a normal process that occurred. You had to, just like if you're in certain places, you got to be careful. Maybe you got the windows rolled up, you got the doors locked, you're being careful about where you're going. And so they're listening to this going, okay, so the man gets attacked by robbers, and immediately people are going to go, that's awful. Because you think about a guy getting beaten and bloodied and pummeled, and people just pounding on him and taking everything that's his, taking his clothing, taking all this. And so they see this. He was attacked by robbers. And Jesus says, now listen, they stripped him of his clothes. Gosh, it's awful. They beat him. This would be on YouTube, by the way, if they had this today. They beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. That is awful. Think about that story. The guy is going from Jerusalem to Jericho. Perhaps he had worshipped God. He was at the temple. He comes back down to Jericho. And so here he is. He's stripped of his clothes. He's left naked, leaving him half dead. And then, here it comes, a priest. A priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, and I'm sure they leaned in, because I'm sure the priest is going to do something. Down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Did you catch that? He sees this guy, maybe the guy's moaning, barely alive, beaten, bloodied, and bruised. He sees him on this side of the road, and he does this number. He's a priest. Do you know why the priest didn't touch the guy? Unclean. The guy would be unclean if he touched him. He would get his hands dirty, and according to what he understood as Jewish law, it would defile him. And so because of his belief system, instead of helping somebody that was hurting, he literally made the conscious choice to walk down the other side of the road. Not because he saw somebody suspicious and he didn't want to get robbed. He saw somebody that he didn't want to get his hands dirty and he didn't want to be considered unclean. He was concerned about the religious perspective and what it would mean for him as a priest according to religious law. So to a Levite, another expert, came to the place, and I'm sure this guy's going, this attorney must be going, whoa, because he was an expert in the law too. So the priest has gone by, and the attorney's probably going, oh, okay. Now he gets the Levite. Ooh, well, I bet the Levite stopped, right? Nope. Levite came to the place and saw him, and what did he do? Conscious choice. Passed by and went to the other side. Now, the attorney asked Jesus because the Samaritans were half Jews. They were considered unclean. If you were a pure Jew, you didn't deal with the Samaritans, and you certainly didn't deal with the Gentiles. Remember that we talked about the court of the Gentiles and the court of women. They were only allowed to go so far in the temple. Gentiles and women. But and Jesus, imagine he paused, he probably said, but a Samaritan, he probably said it like that to them, but a Samaritan, I imagine that he leaned in, said a Samaritan, and put in parentheses, the ones that you hate, the ones that are unclean, the ones that you don't touch or have anything to do with it, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and he saw him. Here it is. Here's the words. He saw him, and he took pity on him. He wasn't concerned about his belief at that moment. He was a Samaritan. This guy was probably a Jew. Wasn't concerned about his belief at the moment. He wasn't even concerned about the destination, the busyness of where he had to get to. It says literally, he sees the guy, he takes pity on him, he went to him. Now notice what he did. He bandaged his wounds. He probably ripped up his own tunic to bandage up the guy's wounds. It says he poured oil and wine, a disinfectant and a healing agent, costing him money. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. So what you imagine here is Jesus is painting this picture of, you've got these religious leaders and these religious experts who walk by this guy because they don't want to get unclean. They don't want to get their hands dirty. They don't want to be considered ceremonially unclean because of their belief system, and maybe they're too busy and they got to get to where they need to go. And here comes a Samaritan that's traveling along the way who's the racial, political, social, religious enemy of this guy, and he literally picks him up, bandages his wound, probably spends the night with him in the inn to make sure that he's going to survive. Stays the night with him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, a few days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper, and said this: look after him. He said, and when I return, listen to this, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Here comes the question. Jesus doesn't miss a beat. He looks at the attorney. He says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man that fell into the hands of the robbers? Was it the religious Jews? Yep. Was it the Samaritan? Yep. The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus then told him something that was going to be so difficult for him. Go and do likewise. Why was it going to be difficult? Because he believed he was better. Because he believed he had a corner on the truth. Because he believed that he should inherit eternal life over everybody else. Because he believed he was better than a Samaritan. And all Jesus said was, you had one guy that was the racial, political, social enemy of this person, and he had mercy. Literally says he took pity on him. The guy didn't care about his belief system. He didn't care about his pride. He didn't care about how busy he was. And I want you to keep this in mind. The need was right in front of him. He literally did not have to go out of his way. Hold on to that thought. Now it's odd because you never hear this story. You never see what it's wedged in between, because it's wedged in between the disciples coming back of their first missionary journey. We have the story of the Good Samaritan, but then another odd story occurs right after it. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, verse 38, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. It's nice. They were friends. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now, y'all have heard this before. We've talked about this if you've been here for any length of time. Listen to what he said. But Martha, here we go. Listen, if you underline this, I don't care if you underline it in our Bible. You write this down in your notes. Do something. Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. And she comes to Jesus and she says, I imagine it went like this. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the dishes, to do all the prep work, to make this entire meal by myself? You all are sitting here talking. You're making merry. You're having fun. And she's left me to do all the work. Don't you even care? She's not listening to me. How about if you tell her to help me? Isn't that great? Well, hey, can you go over and Jesus, she's not helping. Can you go tell her to help me? Because she's not helping me. And don't you think, here I am doing all of this work. I love how Luke says it. She was distracted. She was busy. And notice what Jesus says to her. I don't know why he didn't say it 3 times. Martha, Martha does. I would have preferred Martha, Martha, Martha. When I get to heaven, I'm just going to say, Jesus, how come you didn't say it 3 times? Because it just would have been better to go, Martha, Martha. My mom, you, Bobby, Bobby, Bobby. If you got 3 of them, it was like, oh boy, am I in trouble. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. Wait, listen. Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Listen, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Do you see the stories? People distracted by their belief, distracted by how they've always done things, distracted by the fact that they didn't want to get their hands dirty, distracted by the theology and the ritual and all of the stuff that was going through their mind, so much so that they were so distracted by it and so manipulated by it that they can see a guy that's hurting right in front of them that's probably moaning and left for dead, and they make the conscious choice because of their belief system to walk around him. And then all of a sudden you've got Mary and Martha, who knew Jesus, brings him in. And this sounds really important because we've been there where you've had to do all the work and everybody else sitting around and you got to do the dishes and and they're in there just visiting. And she says, Jesus, do you see how busy I am? Are you watching this? I'm doing all of this. And she doesn't care. Tell her to help. But Jesus said, you're so worried about so much stuff. So much is floating around up here that it's all over the place when really there's only one thing. And Mary's chosen it. And it will not be taken away from her. They complicated the simple. They complicated the simple because of their belief and because of their busyness. See, I think we do that in the church so often and in churches. We start another program. Well, let's figure out how to start small groups instead of just meeting. We got to do this, and let's start programming this and doing that, and we're going to accomplish this and accomplish that. And meanwhile, we plan. Let's do this. And we mistake all of this planning and all of this stuff for actually action. And we complicate it. It makes us feel better when we're busy. I remember quite a number of years ago, I had the opportunity to work with this guy in a book. He was already had the publisher. He was ready to go. I was helping him ghostwrite it. It was a business book, and he had written a couple of bestsellers. And so I was excited to be doing this and thought, I'm going to do this, and then I'll be able to write mine. And so this is going to be a good thing. And it was a chance to work with this particular author. And I remember, you know what the hardest part? We got 5 chapters in, and he decided to nix the project, not because he didn't like it, but because he has attention deficit disorder, and he went on to something else because it was no longer important to him. And he had enough money to be able to do that. So, but at any rate, you know what the hardest part of writing those 5 chapters were? I'm telling you, I would check my email. I would walk around. I would go change the light bulbs. I'd brush my teeth for the 10th time. I did everything, and then I'd go read a book to make sure that I was going to write right. Meanwhile, the hardest thing was actually sitting down and writing. And I mistook the busyness for getting it done. We do that in church. And we go out of our way to try to do stuff. I grew up in a church where missions was a big. We had these Faith Promise missions conferences, and man, we would have the missionaries come in from all over the world, and we felt so good about ourselves because we were supporting missionaries in Africa, and we weren't going across the street because it's easier to give money over there, and it makes us feel good, and it's not that we shouldn't do it, than doing what's in front of us. See, here's the thing. The point that I want you to understand, especially this first story, is that we miss opportunities every single day to help somebody that is right in front of us because we're distracted. Because of our belief systems, we will miss it. Sometimes we walk around it because we think we don't need to help that person because they're not like us, or because we disagree with their lifestyle, or because. And then we go, but I watched this on TV. I listened to this podcast. And we get distracted with all the other activity. And we miss the fact because we're thinking about so many other things. And we walk right past an opportunity that is literally right in front of us. You know what the message for us, I think, in sort of all of this today is this one thing. This is the simplicity of what you and I have to do. We've complicated the simple. Now we're going to simplify it. And it's 3 words. You and I have got to be mindful, 4 words, of the moments. Let me say that again. We have to be mindful of the moments. See, usually when we're pumping gas, we're sitting there thinking we're talking on the phone, and meanwhile, somebody may walk right by us who is hurting. It may be the gas attendant. Sometimes we're so busy, maybe on our phones when we're at the restaurant, that we don't realize that maybe if we if we don't pull out our tip chart and go, I want to do exactly 18%, that extra $2 or $3 may mean the world to that person. Sometimes I've been in places and I've seen a first responder, because my heart goes out to those folks because I've worked with them and my family's in it, or I've seen somebody that is in the military, and I go, I just tell the manager, just give me their ticket, and then I leave. Somebody left me a note one time. I think I may have read the note to you. They left a note in case I came back in because they were in a real bind, and I bought them lunch. It cost me like $15. But it's a moment that's in front of us, and we miss so many opportunities because we're thinking about, how can I make a difference over here? How can I make a difference over there? How can we reach the community? We reach the community by reaching the one that is in front of us. And just taking the people, they're hurting for so many different reasons. And sometimes we want to, don't lecture them. I get people ask me all the time, what do I say to somebody about this? What do I say to somebody about that? And always the question is, what do I say? And here's my response back. How about if you just listen. We always want to say something. But what if you just listened? There are so many moments that are in front of us. And you're probably looking at that going, that's it? Yes, that's it. It's that simple, but we've complicated what God has called us to do. It's simply being aware and then acting. Aware and act. Awareness and action. Awareness and action. Awareness and action. We'll have opportunities every single day. We just have to ask God to make us be in that moment. Because you never know what's happening around you and to the people that are all around you. Years ago, and the book must be at my house. I thought it was here. Years ago, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Robert Schuller when he was alive. And, the evangelicals, everybody criticized him and, whatever. But he did an incredible job at the church out there. He was a great author, and he was inspiring. And he'd taken that church from nothing. And so he was coming to Hollywood. Here, I was like, really? So I talked to the manager at the bookstore that used to be over on Sterling, and I was like, I'd been in there, it was like a satellite office for me, so I went there and I said, listen, I want to meet him. He was doing a book signing, but we'll get you in, because you know me, I don't like to wait in line. So I really didn't have, they kind of moved me up. And it was interesting because Dr. Schuller had always said that every person needs a look, a word, and a touch. Now you got to be careful with the touch part today, and I'm not being smart. I always ask people, is it okay to hug you? Because some people are like, ooh, no. But they need a look, a word, and a touch. And I thought, and I remember him saying that. It was just a look, a word, a touch, look, a word, a touch, a look, a word, a touch. People need that. People need that. I was like, all right. So I go up there, and I got the book, and he's going to sign the book. And so he says hello to me, and he shakes my hand. And for some reason, I didn't hear him ask other people. He goes, tell me, what do you do for a living? And I said, I'm a pastor. And he stopped, and he stood up, and he looked me in the eyes, and he shook my hand, and he grabbed my arm, and he said, thank you for what you do. He said, I really appreciate it. And I was like, wow. It was a look, it was a word, and it was a touch. And I have never forgotten that. You can't do it for everybody. You know what? You're going to miss somebody. Sometimes you're going to fail. I do it all the time. But I have to keep looking for the things that are in front of me. Looking for the things that are in front of me. Using the gifts and the strengths that God's given me to reach the people that are in front of me. God puts them there, you reach, and you move on. And you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going. Because everybody out there is dealing with something. I bet you have no idea what some of the people that are right here in the pews next to you even deal with. I look out here and know people that have lost children, spouses, people that have lost parents. I know people out here that have lost homes, and they've lost battles in recovery, and everybody's got a battle. Everybody's dealing with something. We don't have to complicate it. We just have to be mindful of the moments, because God will put these people right in front of us. And the challenge is to put our belief aside, our busyness aside, and walk by on their side, not the other. Let's pray.